Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. And what a fantastic occasion to be speaking with you and such an astute panel with us today when we look at the Cities with Nature as a platform and also participating in the Daring Cities for Climate Resilience platform here, which is a first for ICLEI and a first, I think, for the world, where there's a strong focus from the urban community on addressing climate change, climate resilience. And of course, we all know that nature is a fundamental part in that puzzle, and that we don't only focus at the moment the world's attention on a climate crisis, but that we are very, very much deeply finding ourselves embedded in an unprecedented nature challenge as well. So I'm very happy to bring to you today, we can move to the next slide, the program, which is jam-packed and we only have an hour. My name is Kirby Brandt. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of ICLEI and also the Global Director of ICLEI's Biodiversity Centre. And from my side, I'm very, very happy to bring to you a panel as wide-ranging as IUCN, the Nature Conservancy, UNEP, WWF, World Urban Parks, and of course also very aptly, because Daring Cities is held in Europe, our friend Robbie Beaver from the European Committee of Regions. So thank you very much to everybody joining us. I'm going to, without further ado, just say that today we're focusing on a very, very important aspect of nature, not only as a solution to climate, but also nature as a fundamental issue that needs to be addressed if we want to have a more sustainable world and if we want to have any chance at achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, or in fact, the new global biodiversity or climate frameworks that we are agreeing on at global level. We know action happens best locally. So without further ado, I'm introducing my colleague Ingrid Coetzee, who's going to take us through a presentation on Cities with Nature. So if we can move, I will introduce the panelists you can see up on the screen here, one by one as they start, but you will see that we have a very astute panel. But without further ado, I'm at this moment going to pass on to Ingrid Coetzee. Ingrid, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirby. And I'm going to take everybody through a whistle-stop tour of Cities with Nature. And if I can have my next slide, please. Cities with Nature is a big tent. It's a partnership initiative between the IUCN, ICLEI, and the Nature Conservancy. Next slide, please. So essentially, it's a worldwide platform, and we have at the moment more than 170, almost 175 cities from around the world. I think it's 58 countries around the world. And the next slide, that have joined Cities with Nature already. And basically what we do is provide a platform where cities can share and strengthen and take collective action, and also then embark on a journey to recreate and reconnect urban communities with nature. And I want to show you how we do that. So the next slide basically shows you that when you join up as a city to join Cities with Nature, you are offered a variety of ways in which you can join. There's a registry, there's a community hub, a knowledge and research hub, and there are also partnership offerings as well. And if you take me to the next slide, I want to just say very briefly why it is that we need a Cities with Nature, and why specifically nature in cities. So we know that cities are dependent upon nature and the ecosystem services, the services that and the benefits from nature. But we also know that it's important to protect the nature and the biodiversity around us to ensure that we have these life support and sustaining cities systems. And I think that the crises that we find ourselves at the moment in terms of health and nature and climate are really bringing those lessons home in very harsh and tangible ways. And in my next slide, what I want to show you just very briefly is to show how the Cities with Nature registry works. We're obviously not able to give you an online live presentation, but this is a facility that is available free. It's an interactive interface, and it allows cities from across the world to connect with each other. and to go on this journey. So if you take me through to the next slide, basically what it does is to say to you that when you go into the pathway, how you can proceed along the pathway. And one point to make here is that cities are at different stages of their journey with nature. Some cities have been on this journey for many years, others are just starting. And you can join the pathway at any particular place, and you can go back around the pathway again. It's not a sort of sequential thing. Into the next slide, what we see there, and here I'm going to just stop for a little bit longer with the next slide, is to show how this journey actually works. It's based on a methodology that ICLEI had developed within the climate space, and essentially it's around first analyzing and understanding what your nature in the city is about. Then on the basis of that understanding, coming up with your plans and your frameworks and your actions and the commitments. And finally, once one is comfortable as a city with what you're doing, the next progression would be to take accelerated action and to move beyond what the commitments are, and maybe also beyond the city boundaries. So if we can go to the next slide, essentially what I'm trying to show you now is just a glimpse of the interface that cities will see when once they've signed up and joined Cities with Nature. This is just one of the screens. This is one of the analyzing steps. And essentially what happens here is you get the option, you're prompted. Yes, you want to share and want to inspire others. Maybe you've made a commitment. Maybe you've joined the Edinburgh Declaration, signed that, whatever the commitment may be. And then you get an option to upload it. If, however, you have not yet embarked on this journey and you want to learn from others, you can tick that box, and then it'll show you some examples, some best cases, some case studies, just to sort of help the city along that route. On the right-hand side of that slide, you will see that there are two boxes. And the one box is about, basically, for each of the steps that you go through this journey, it explains what that particular step means, what it's about. And secondly, there's an additional box of information to explain why it's important. Why is it important to make a commitment or to make a plan or to take action? So if we go to the next slide, I want to show you essentially how people that are not signed in other words, they're not cities, how they would experience this. Let's say, for example, here we have a real example from the Greater London Authority, which happens to be one of our pioneer cities. They were one of the early cities that signed on. And so if I come from the city of Cape Town, or I'm an academic that's based in Bonn or wherever I might be, this is the face that I will see. So I will see that there's a picture of London. There's a very short, very succinct statement. It gives me some city information. There's usually a photo of the mayor with a nice quote. And then I can also see how far the city has progressed on its journey and what its major sort of activities are. What we don't see are all the details. That is information that's just there for those cities that have signed up, and that is information where the cities are able to share, but it's not made known publicly. If we move to the next slide, something else that cities get when they sign up to Cities with Nature is they get access to a lot of tools and resources. Now, in the short space of this time, I cannot impossibly show you all the tools and resources. What I wanted to do is just show you one or two. For example, this is an interactive poster that we've created. It's about nature's contributions to people, all the ecosystem services. And each of those little bubbles that you can see, when you hover across it, it takes you into a next level of information. So the city can see, for example, what pollinators are, how they work, how the city can engage with them, and so forth. And I think there's about 28 or more of these little interactive bubbles. That's one of them. On my next slide, you can see some of the other sort of facilities and resources that we do share with cities. And this, for example, is a guideline. It happens to be an IUCN guideline. It's one of the more recent ones that came out. It's around guidelines for conserving connectivity through ecosystem networks. And so, for example, there's a little summary. There's a link to the actual guideline, which takes you to the IUCN website. And then it also just tells you a little bit about what are the key salient points of that guideline. And there are several hundreds of these, and we keep them updated. As new guidelines come on board, we put them up, we have a look to see what the relevance is for cities. My next slide will show you something that we're very proud of, and I'm hoping that most of you that have linked into our resources will have seen this, and this is our Cities with Nature buzz. You'll see the little bee in the corner there. It actually has a little bee going around. And our buzz, the most recent one came out yesterday, features news about events, about actions taken at cities, about new programs, all kinds of things. We also run a Twitter feed, and again, it makes links to other websites or to other events and activities and actions that cities are telling us about. And there's usually a little bit of a feature article as well. And if we go into the next slide, here's another feature that we brought on. Certainly this was something that happened not when we initially developed Cities with Nature, but obviously when COVID came and hit the world, we realized that we needed to codify, if covidify, as I can say it that way, Cities with Nature. And we brought on this feature about how cities can learn from the COVID experience and share experience with others. And essentially, it's about bringing together a community of practice. It helps them connect online, etc. And the interesting thing that we found that throughout the COVID lockdowns, even as lockdowns have lessened and now again going into second wave, we have had a steady flow of cities signing up to Cities with Nature, which really just shows not only the power of connectivity online, but also the power and the proof of concept of this particular platform. And those have been cities where we haven't necessarily actively recruited cities. We've got cities from the far ends of the world that have joined our platform. What I want to do now is just to show you some of the coming soon features. The platform is not a static platform. We are continually improving and developing new enhancements. For example, we're working on new pathways. While we've got the COVID slide up, we're working on a nature and health pathway, certainly also a resilience one. We're talking about a food pathway, and there are many more. If you take me to my next slide, one of the ones that we are really focusing on a lot at the moment and that we're very proud of is what we call our commitment platform. And this is particularly topical now where we're talking about the biodiversity and climate agendas. This commitment platform is specifically linked to commitments that we want cities to make in relation to the new global biodiversity framework, taking us to 2030 and ultimately to 2050. And if you move on to the next slide, I just want to give you a bit of a glimpse of what we're trying to do here. The platform is going to be interactive. We realize that cities do a lot of reporting. So we're wanting to do it in a way that is easy, that is simple, that is fun, and that is not additional workload. In other words, this is not another set of reports that you're having to do. We know that cities report a lot to their provinces, etc. And we're just going to pull all of that, and we're linking it very specifically and working closely with the SCBD to make sure that what cities do link up to what happens at the national level and at the global level, so that we can aggregate up the actions at the lower level and show the real global impact. And it will be linked to the targets and the milestones in the CBD, and we're going to have a dashboard so that cities can see how they're making progress. In my next slide, what we're also wanting to, well, we have started developing, is to show that cities are also about people, the people that live in cities, that work there, that play there. So this community hub, and we're working with some of our partners here, but this community hub is around a space where ordinary people, young, old, whatever they may be, can share their stories, their engagements, their experiences of nature in a city. And it could be a blog, it could be a video, it could be a photograph of bees in my garden, whatever the case may be. So that is something that we're working on at the moment. And the next slide shows that we're also thinking about the connection that there needs to be and that cities feel and that the academics feel about how do the academics and the research sector connect with cities to ensure that the research they do is sort of relevant to cities, and that cities' experiences and information can feed in, so that there can be a sort of a traffic and communication between cities and researchers. It's a meeting place, of sort of a virtual online library and lab, as it were, for cities and urban nature. So these are some of the elements that we are developing. And then just in my last slide, I just want to end off by coming back to the whole concept of daring cities. And what we're wanting to do today is to dare cities to commit to being cities that plan, design, and act with nature, and to please join up to Cities with Nature, whether it's a big or small or metropolitan area. We don't mind. Please, I've got some email addresses and I'll share them in the chat box. We are wanting to have 1,000+ cities by certainly within the very near future. We're getting there slowly, but we do need a lot more commitment from cities. And this is your dare at Daring Cities. Please join Cities with Nature. Thank you, Kobe.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. And indeed, I think what you've emphasized is that Cities with Nature is a platform for all and also by all. And although ICLEI is sort of the convener and the coordinator of Cities with Nature, by no means is this Cities with Nature an ICLEI platform. It's a platform shared by everybody on this panel here today and by many other partners. I think ICLEI and IUCN and the Nature Conservancy as founding partners are speaking to no less than 50 global and regional organizations around the world who want to come on board and join. I would like to view Cities with Nature as a big tent, but just a roof and with open windows on the sides for everybody to enter, because our cities ask of us to collaborate and find easy entry points. And also Cities with Nature, I think what it can also do is to capture the rich information that comes out of finite projects that are funded for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, and then unfortunately have to end. Where does all that knowledge and that rich experience go to? It can become a rich resource that lives on forever in Cities with Nature, and cities can choose whether they like that methodology or it works for them or not. So thank you very much for giving us that oversight. We as a panel have a lot in common. Not only are we almost all women, sorry, Robbie, but I know, Robbie, we feel you very much as part of our team too. Our hearts are also green. We have in common the fact that greening cities and bringing nature into cities and mainstreaming it is at the heart of creating a more sustainable world. So from Ingrid, who's our Senior Project Manager at Cities with Nature and our Cities Biodiversity Centre at ICLEI, I'm moving on promptly now to Chantal van Ham, who is with the IUCN and the EU Programme Manager of Nature-Based Solutions, as well as the IUCN focal point for local and regional authorities. IUCN Regional Office in Brussels is Chantal's home, and from there, Chantal is going to address us. Thank you, Chantal. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kobe and Ingrid, for inviting IUCN to be part of this inspiring exchange. If we can go to my slide, I brought one slide with me, which shows an image of a photographer who's called George Steinmetz, who documented unique perspectives of the Earth with a motorized paraglider for his book called A Human Planet, and also for his New York Times depiction of the decade in which we almost stopped climate change. I think it's worth looking at that because it gives us another perspective on Earth and on the issues that we're discussing here. And the image is made actually in Papua, Indonesia, where tree people traditionally built their houses high to protect themselves from swarming mosquitoes, but also from troublesome neighbors and evil spirits. And I think that zooming out at looking at the bigger picture is essential for us to see the pathway for future action. And that is also how I see Cities with Nature, as it helps cities to progress in that journey to protect nature and to ensure that nature takes care of our world's urban citizens. And IUCN would like to thank ICLEI for that long-standing cooperation that we have to make nature truly part of urban decisions and actions. And IUCN and its members and partners and experts all around the world are ready to support cities with the knowledge and tools and best practices that we have through the IUCN Urban Nature Alliance and the Urban Nature Index that is under development, coordinated by my colleague Russell Gold, but also the ICN Red List, Nature for All, the ICN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions, the work that we do under the Bond Challenge for Forest Landscape Restoration, the ecosystem-based adaptation work, and many more. So I won't keep it long here because we want to also have time to interact, but I really would like to say that ICN is pleased to work together with you to mobilize investment to restore our ecosystems, which I think is the mission of this century that we all have in common, but also to restore the connection between people and nature, to mainstream nature in all sectors and policies, and also to phase out harmful subsidies and to create more recognition for the value that nature has for human health and well-being, making it also part of education programs, because I think together we can do so much more than we ever imagined to create these cities that we believe in, that can be just and resilient and livable. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chantal, and thank you, IUCN, for the support and the collaboration over many, many years, as you say. IUCN is a proud founding member of Cities with Nature, and we go to another one, pre-recorded message from the Nature Conservancy, this time the other man on the panel, Mr. Andrew Deutsch, who is the Director of Global Policy, Institutions and Conservation Finance, very important topic, like conservation finance, from the Nature Conservancy. Andrew, over to you for your message to us. Thank you.
I'm Andrew Deutsch. I lead global policy for the Nature Conservancy. We helped found Cities for Nature because we thought it was a crucial platform to connect ICLEI's membership, thousands of cities from around the world, with information on planning and implementing nature-based solutions for human well-being and climate adaptation. Cities with Nature plays a crucial role in knowledge translation, offering guidance to cities on how to protect and restore nature. It also helps record commitments cities make, serving as a much-needed platform for urban commitments under the Convention on Biological Diversity. We are hoping eventually hundreds or even thousands of cities will join and will make meaningful commitments to use nature-based solutions in the future. I also want to reflect on two recent events. 2 weeks ago, the UN celebrated its 75th anniversary with a focus on how the world, in the face of the COVID crisis, could re-accelerate progress towards the SDGs. It also held its first heads of state level summit on global biodiversity, and many leaders identified the interconnectedness between the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, and our ability to achieve the SDGs. Underneath these conversations, though, was a recognition that the multilateral system for international cooperation itself is performing poorly and frankly under existential threat. Then 2 days ago, Pope Francis released a new encyclical which recognized this global challenge and essentially repeated the lessons that we're all taught in kindergarten. Be nice, respect each other, and cooperate. So we're really hopeful that the potential of Cities for Nature. In these times of global gridlock, cities are problem solvers on the front lines, innovating and implementing solutions. Rather than just wait for action to trickle down from global institutions or national governments, we hope progress and cooperation can also trickle up. Cities are a source of hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And true to form, what wonderful wise words and concisely and eloquently conveyed. Thank you very much to the Nature Conservancy for your support and active collaboration in Cities with Nature and in so many of our other initiatives. We now turn to UNEP. And we're going to Miss Martina Otter, an inspirational lady, making sure that the urban agenda is fundamentally placed within the work of the United Nations Environment Programme. Martina is the head of Cities and Lifestyles at UNEP, or let me rather say United Nations Environment. So Martina, over to you. Thank you very much. Can we please unmute?
Now it works. Thank you. I tried to unmute myself, but I couldn't. So thanks very much, Kobe and Ingrid, for the kind introduction and the invitation to be with you today. We joined Cities with Nature because it is such a timely effort for raising awareness and ambition, and it is a fantastic platform for collaboration. and also because it's a good fit with UNEP Cities agenda, which is about decarbonizing, decoupling, and detoxifying, and investing in nature. And what I want to do is I want to flag 3 areas where cities and nature very much connect. And well, no need to underline the importance that this whole topic has now just been receiving as well, with this wake-up call that the COVID-19 pandemic has been for us. And my first point is bringing back nature into our cities is super important. And obviously there's solutions already, urban forests, commitments made, urban forests, green public spaces, green roofs. And this comes with benefits for health and well-being, from air quality improvements to flood control, to reducing urban heat island effects and cooling needs in buildings, and can also help to build the ecosystem corridors. So we see there is a real connection between the different agendas. Cooling, for example, is amongst the fastest growing building energy end users, and meeting this demand with nature-based solutions shows how we can connect the nature and the climate agendas. And this goes as much for mitigation as well as for enhancing resilience. And to get these nature-based solutions to scale, we need to carve out the appropriate space for local action, also in the multilateral environments, with the New Deal for Nature and also the new climate commitment updates that are due. My second point is about nature around cities, which is under pressure by urban sprawl. And here, density, and particularly planning for strategic density, is critical for land, material, as well as cost efficiency of infrastructure. And density has been under a lot of scrutiny recently with the COVID-19 pandemic, but it is actually, we need to say that density is not the issue, overcrowding is, in terms of virus spread. So going forward, we need more interconnected but more self-sufficient neighborhoods where nature is closer to cities, to the citizens, and where economic activity and employment can be reached by walking and biking distance. And we have issued a guide on integrated approaches for sustainable neighborhoods, which does show how we can link the green, the blue, and the green infrastructure going forward. My third point is about the need to reduce pressure on nature away from cities, and that goes hand in hand with well, rethinking our currently unsustainable production and consumption patterns. And in the Secretary General's brief on COVID-19 in an urban world, we did highlight cities' critical role on the way towards circularity and keeping materials for as long as possible and at the highest value possible in the economic cycle, to reduce resource use and the embodied carbon. Here again, the connection between resources and the climate agenda, while also creating local job opportunities. And so I think it's really important to have those 3 areas in mind. To close, cities have a track record of reinventing themselves, and in building back better, we need to do so for the health of people and the planet. And I'm very much looking forward to working together to invest in nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's incredibly important for us to have the United Nations going on this journey with us. And Martina, for you and your team, the work that you're doing, also hats off. We know that you focus a lot on the circular economy and on, in your lifestyles position, also on consumption and production patterns. And thank you for highlighting that. That is so inherently part of how we address nature. And a point made in this morning's session, which had a different focus. It had a focus on global advocacy around nature and climate. Mr. Oliver Hillel from the UNCBD made the point as well that we shouldn't think that a city ever acts in isolation, and what happens in a city only affects the city, because the lifestyles, what we eat, what we consume, how we travel, what we do, who we connect with, that is global. So immediately even a small city influences the global balance, that very delicate balance of nature, biodiversity, the web of life on which we all depend for our existence and for our future. So thank you for highlighting the very, very important aspect of circularity and looking at lifestyles as well in cities. And I think that's where a whole of society, whole of government approach, whole of community approach is so important. And I know that in all our programs, Chantal within the IUCN, and Robbie, what's happening in Europe, and Jennifer in WWF, etc., and Jane, of course, in urban parks as well, you know, that's something we all embrace. So thank you very, very much for those words from on behalf of UN Environment, Martina. We're now turning indeed to WWF and to Dr. Jennifer Leonard, who works very closely with us as well and is also a partner in Cities with Nature. Jennifer is the global lead of WWF Cities. And it's fantastic to welcome Jennifer all the way from Sweden with us here today to speak on behalf of WWF to this agenda. Thank you, Jennifer. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kobe. And I should truthfully say that I do work for the WWF Swedish office, but I am based actually in Chile. So it's a real global world we're living in now. I just wanted to say thank you, Ingrid, so much for running through the Cities with Nature platform. Certainly we've seen it before, but you know, it's really good to kind of see all the new developments you're making. And I want to pinpoint on one word that you said about registry of the data, which is I think where we really started from WWF side, our journey with ICLEI. We started with your team working on climate change and carbon, and really seeing the developments there in terms of collaboration with CDP, collaboration with ICLEI, and how can we really get cities to do their data reporting on climate. So this is where our cities team started. We started from the climate journey, but certainly WWF is well known for its work on conservation. A few weeks back, we released this year's Living Planet Index with some very startling news. The population sizes of mammals, birds, fish, and amphibians and reptiles have dropped a startling 68% on average since 1970, 68%. And in many continents, for example, Latin America, where I'm living, a 94% drop. So this shows that, you know, the urgency to address climate, to address biodiversity loss, to address urban sprawl, and many of these issues are going so closely hand in hand. Latin America is also the most urbanized region in the world. So it shows there is a very clear link that we need to figure out and we need to get right. From WWF side, we are slowly, or quickly I should say, but newly moving into the urban nature-based solution space. And we have a vision to really work on improving and expanding biological corridors in and through cities, so that cities are much more connected to their rural peripheries, to the protected areas surrounding them, that we can see these biological corridors of connecting communities within our cities. And where do we want to start this journey? Of course, we want to start it, again, learning and working together with ICLEI, both in terms of your great platforms, so where we can really show cities what is already happening out there so that we can not start over, but really work together, but also in the policy space so that we align our messages across organizations like ourselves. Our motto at WWF is Together Possible, and we definitely see that this is a very crucial message when we talk about climate change, when we talk about biodiversity loss, and in cities we see so many synergies to address many of these issues at the same time. I want to talk on one final point, and that is on public engagement and accountability. Certainly we know that ICLEI is really one of the leading organizations when it comes to city networks and you know, being the voice for cities, being the connector to the city voices, but we know that cities are more than local governments. So how can we really galvanize and excite urban citizens to say yes to urban nature? Why urban nature? If we're deciding, do we want to put up a mall or do we want to put up a new park? And what are the benefits of these different spaces? And how can we really, you know, whether it's the public sector, whether it's the private sector, whether it's the citizens on the street, to see the value? And I can say, when we talk a lot about COVID, and certainly in Santiago, we had an almost 5-month quarantine period here. So it was very difficult to, you know, be staring outside, but be stuck inside. But now that as we're starting to open up, I've seen such an interest to go to the parks. You know, numbers at scales we did not see previously. We've seen streets closed to allow restaurants to do social distancing, and you know, this streets for people, parks for people, and also parks for nature. And I think this connectivity is, you know, something that we really want to bring to the table. How can we get people excited? How can we work with you to keep, you know, local governments accountable to this, and you know, really scale up the progress that you've already made so wonderfully. Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you so much for that. And I know you quite well, and I really never thought that you would be living in Santiago and not in Sweden. So I learned something very new today. And thank you also for bringing those South American statistics into the conversation. Very important for us to focus on the global South. And I particularly like the focus that we've heard from several of you speaking now about land use. A lot of the issues around cities and habitat loss and that sort of thing relates back to how we use our land, how we plan at macro scale and at micro scale, and allow for nature to be mainstreamed also into land use activities and to be considered when spatial planning and spatial development plans are taking shape. We work on a number of interesting projects with many of you in terms of policies around land use management in Africa and elsewhere, where our cities are still developing and where there is still a lot of opportunity for us to make the right choices and not to concretize everything up, but to look at softer, greener solutions. And let's not forget that even the most concrete city can actually, through urban tinkering and through other processes, redesign, reshape, redevelop to mainstream nature and make place for nature, even if it's starting in the cracks of the sidewalks. Nature has its place and it's got to be back there in cities. And yes, COVID-19, I think, as tragic as it is and it's unfolding still, it does leave us with the opportunity to press a reset button and to just actually focus on how we can bring nature back to people where it belongs. We are indeed also nature. And with that, I think it's really, really appropriate to now move to the World Urban Parks and hear from another lady. This time we're turning to Ms. Jane Miller, who's joining us all the way from the chair position of the World Urban Parks, all the way from the US. So Jane, over to you, and I'd like to hear from you. We collaborate very deeply on parks and so on, and you've gone through a journey as World Urban Parks, and you're about to embark on a very successful and well-planned congress also. How is the experience? What are you aspiring for, and what makes you excited about the future of urban parks? And yeah, just a message in terms of the connection also to Cities with Nature. Thank you, Jane. We need to unmute Jane, please.
I think I have the ability to control, but am I unmuted now? All right, thank you. Again, Ingrid and Kobe, thank you so much for pulling this panel together, and thank you for your work at ICLEI, and particularly with the Cities with Nature. Urban spaces are critical. By 2050, we will double the population that's living in cities. We don't have 75% of the infrastructure that's needed to maintain cities in the next 30 years. So our work to enhance cities with nature and with a natural environment is absolutely critical. I also am very pleased with the partnerships we actually have with all of these organizations and the synergy we all have around enhancing nature, particularly focusing on cities. As Kobe mentioned, World Urban Parks is a relatively young organization. We started in 2015, consolidating 2 other international organizations together. World Urban Parks provides international advice, support, and getting connected with urban park, open space, and recreation issues, people, and activities. And we hold World Urban Congresses that, because of COVID, we have had to make shifts as well. One of the major documents that we have produced is our Pathways to Recovery document to provide cities and professionals with how to respond as a result of COVID, how to reopen our cities safely and integrating nature into those reopenings. We're also launching Urban October with a number of webinars around the globe. We're also launching our Healthy Parks, Healthy People statement through a webinar on October 31st. And we're also showcasing challenging obstacles, innovation, and fun in parks through a My Parks video throughout the month of October. We'll be showcasing a number of videos about what cities are doing to respond to COVID and innovative ways we're responding. Just as many of you have mentioned, the use of parks has exploded during COVID, and it's our responsibility to help people safely and effectively use open space and parks to get out, to be healthy, whether it's physically, emotionally, mentally, to manage through COVID-19. We also were scheduled to have our World Congress in Tirana this year. What we are doing, however, is we're having a virtual Congress hosted by Tirana November 20th, 23rd, and 27th. We hope that you will join us with that Congress. And then we're also hosting a virtual World Congress in Guadalajara, Mexico in 2021. One thing I want to leave you all with is we are partners with the National Park City movement to actually really rethink how we integrate green space, wildlife in our cities. It takes the whole concept of park spaces and flips it on its head and really looks at the city as its whole, about buildings, about people's access to green space, keeping wildlife, flora and fauna really alive in cities. And our goal is working with the national park cities to have 25 national park cities by 2025. London was the first national park city that launched last year. We're working with Adelaide in Australia to be the second national park city, and we're holding webinars with the national park cities to engage other cities to become national park cities by 2025. Again, supporting nature within cities through that effort. So thank you again very much for hosting this, Kobe and Ingrid, and we're thrilled to be partners with all of you in our efforts to strengthen the natural environment in our urban communities.
Thank you so much, Jane, and thank you also for your collaboration. I think we've heard, this is the Daring Cities platform after all, so we've heard another dare actually to cities to say London dared, and London took hands, the Greater London Authority took hands with Londoners from all walks of life to create the first urban parks, world city urban park. And I think that can be replicable in so many other cases. Jane, you're aspiring to great numbers there. So Daring Cities, here is another opportunity for you to show just why you are the front runners. All those cities that are tuning in and taking part in Daring Cities, please take note. There are many opportunities and many examples here on how you can lead. And we firmly believe that city by city and together we can have a snowballing effect that can actually change the world and can actually be the best way that we can implement that new global biodiversity framework that we're all looking forward to adopt next year. So I'm now turning to our last speaker before we're going to open up for questions and comments from the audience. You're looking at the picture of Mr. Robbie Beaver. Mr. Robbie Beaver is, of course, also a long-standing advocate for this agenda of green cities and nature. And Mr. Robbie Beaver, is a member of the ENVE Commission at the European Committee of Regions and member of Bettemberg Municipal Council in Luxembourg. So Robbie, with this over to you, we know we've worked together on the advocacy front lines in many biodiversity COPs and also climate COPs, and it's a real honor to have you with us. I give you the floor. Thank you, Robbie.
Thank you, Kobe and Ingrid. The honor is on my side. Yes, dear ladies and gentlemen, I am honored and I thank you for inviting me to this panel. You know that the European Committee of the Regions is a voice of subnational governments in the preparation of the European Union legislation. This voice has to be heard in the European policy-making process, because we are local elected people, we are the actors who implement about 2/3 of the environmental legislation in the European Union. Biodiversity action is necessary now if we are serious about bending the curve. Cities, regions, and all subnational governments need to act now. However, they may also need support in developing, implementing, and monitoring their initiatives and policies to halt biodiversity loss and ecosystem services degradation. As part of our work at the European level, the Committee of the Regions will adopt next week its official position called Opinion on the post-2020 biodiversity policy framework, both at the EU and global level. The Cities with Nature platform is part of the document because platforms like this should be a key component in supporting subnational governments, the development of their commitments and actions related to biodiversity. Platforms like Cities with Nature and the soon-to-be Regions with Nature are also very important in helping subnational governments monitoring and reporting their actions on biodiversity. This reporting is useful to themselves, but could also be a strategic tool to report back to authorities at the national level and, in our case, to the European level. Therefore, the Committee of the Regions dares to support Cities with Nature and Regions with Nature at the official platforms of the Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming Action Agenda for Nature and People, to engage and commit subnational governments, disseminating their efforts and recognize the value of nature in cities and regions. So I will advocate for the initiatives at the COR's Committee of the Regions level. And I thank you for this occasion to speak to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beaver, for those encouraging and supporting words, and also for the amazing work that the Committee of Regions is doing in Europe, working within the European Union context, across borders of countries there, to spearhead and advocate for nature, not only in cities, as you rightly point out, but also in regions. And Mr. Beaver did announce, Robbie did announce that we will very soon also launch a sister platform to Cities with Nature called Regions with Nature. And we're doing that in close collaboration with a number of regional network partners, including Regions 4, who's been collaborating very closely with us, and also the Committee of Regions, of course. So we understand that there is a great connect between the city and its hinterland, and city regions and the landscape-based approach is absolutely key and fundamental to addressing any issue related to biodiversity in a city. I would like to just ask Chantal. Chantal, we know that you are very much a proponent for the landscape-based approach. Can you tell us a little bit about your work in this regard right now in IUCN, about the landscape-based approach in the urban and regional context?
Thanks a lot, Kobe. Yes, this work on landscape restoration in particular is part of this global initiative called the Bonn Challenge, under which many countries in the world have made pledges to restore hectares of land. It has a global ambition of restoring 150 million hectares of degraded lands by 2030, and many commitments have already been made, are also been taken into action, and we see that some subnational governments, regions, have been joining this, but we would be very pleased to also bring this work closer to cities, because the work that we do is very much looking at the trade-offs in the landscape, at the different benefits that the landscape provides, and that is also related to cities when we think of drinking water supply, food production, but also many other benefits related to climate impacts. And yeah, we are as well working closely with you, with ICLEI in Europe, in a European initiative called Network Nature, which is a platform for nature-based solutions, remote actions to upscale nature-based solutions, looking at the financial aspects and also best practices and how to overcome some of the hurdles that we still see in terms of looking at traditional approaches, for example, to infrastructure and landscape development. So I think, there's a lot that we can do when we look at good practices and knowledge and that is available in how we can cross these challenging obstacles. And I think in Cities with Nature as well, we are able to bring cities together that face similar challenges and learn how this can be done.
Thank you, Chantal. And there's a lot more that I know you can share. And please do share your connections or links in the chat box. I see we've got a very active chat box here. Feel free to let us know about the projects, and feel free also to make sure that we do our work by promoting your platforms and your initiatives as we should do through Cities with Nature. Martina, I'd like to turn to you with a question on coming back to the lifestyles issue again. With COVID-19 and the current pandemic, do you see that we can achieve real change at urban level in terms of lifestyles and consumption and production? Is that happening? Is it a shift, or is it a temporary situation we find ourselves in? I'm asking this in the context of my city, Cape Town, where we, as you know, we faced a few years ago almost day zero, which meant that our tap water would dry up. But we have now dams that are 100% full thanks to fantastic rains over this winter. But still, our consumption patterns are lower than years ago, decades ago, and we are a lot more people living in the city now. So our lifestyles have changed. Is it possible? Is this shift happening in the world right now?
It's hard to generalize, but definitely there is pockets of that for sure. There has been a wake-up call for a lot of us. We have been starting to rethink certain things, habits that we've had, but we all know bad habits are hard to die as well. So it is a long-term sort of challenge to address that, but there's also a real opportunity how we can piggyback on these pockets of, well, changes and goodwill that we have seen and rescue them over to the new normal once we will be back to that. And there's a number of nudges. You mentioned the water, and obviously one thing is when you open the tap, that's one thing that's very concrete when you yourself have control. But there's a lot of there's technologies that can help us to make that easier. And I think this is where the lifestyles are best supported, when we see it's cool, it's easy to use, it's fun to use. It's those kinds of things. And here we have a real opportunity to connect better between our actions and innovation that is coming in. And maybe the best example is the food one at the moment. I mean, food waste is such a big issue, and obviously that comes with a huge footprint on nature, and particularly urban food habits are more detached from there's the supermarketation on the one side, we go for more processed food and so on, and there's a bit of a return on that. And I think there is maybe one of the key moments because we've been cooking so much more, we've been planning much more how we purchase our food and keeping it better in the fridges and so on. And I think there is room for hope. Yes.
Well, that's positive indeed, but it also tells us that there's a lot of work for us to do. Behavioral change isn't something that happens easily, and it's something we all need to work hard on. And we're very interested to collaborate more with you to see how we can use the Cities with Nature platform and Regions with Nature platform indeed to reach to those urban communities and change lifestyles, really, because that's what the planet requires of us. I think the latest science tells us that we're now using the resources of 1 3/4 of an Earth almost per year. So Jane, I would like to turn to you, and you're welcome to share with us the 4 dialogues that's going to happen, the regional dialogues that you're planning to take place this month. But before you do that, just maybe reflect a little bit about access to these green open spaces and access to parks. Looking specifically from an African point of view, many people here in our continent, even in my city, Cape Town, do not have free and safe and equitable access to open spaces and parks. Like somebody in New York City would be able to go and have a stroll in Central Park and feel quite safe most of the times. How is the World Urban Parks addressing this issue of access and inclusivity in your policies and in the future world of parks that you'd like to see?
Thanks, Kobe. Equity is both to access to parks, but also to quality parks is fundamentally critical. In fact, it's work I personally have been focusing on over the last 10 years. And so it is a major effort of work that we are doing at World Urban Parks. And Kobe and Ingrid, we have entered specifically into a partnership with ICLEI to work particularly in Africa to connect with cities and countries in Africa that don't have that kind of access. While we have a very strong national park system here in the United States, as well as local and state parks, we still have an inequitable access here in the US. In fact, the Trust for Public Land completed a report documenting that parks in the US that are in neighborhoods of color and low income, those parks on average are half the size of parks in wealthy neighborhoods in the US. Also, they are less taken care of. And so we still have issues in the US, but it is an area that we are particularly focusing on, working with ICLEI and other parts of the world to ensure that it's not only access for white, wealthy citizens in the world, but also particularly focusing on those of higher need, lower income communities of color that have been historically underserved and underrepresented in terms of meeting their needs. So developing strategies for equitable investments, so taking public resources, looking at demographic data of cities such as health indicators, such as family poverty, racially concentrated areas of poverty, high rates of crime in neighborhoods, and making investments not only in parks that have great needs, but communities that have great needs based on some of those demographics. So that's areas of focus that we're doing. I will touch a little bit on a couple of webinars that we're going to be hosting in October as part of Urban October. On October 5th, we're holding World Habitat Day, Housing for All with a Better Urban Future. On October 31st is World Cities Day, valuing your communities and cities. So those are a couple days to watch out. We're working with UN and Habitat Urban October events that we're hosting as well in October.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that, Jane, and we'll certainly be supporting those efforts. Jennifer, I want to turn very briefly to you. We have 2 minutes left. In 30, 40 seconds, just tell us, WWF, what is the future like within your organization? We saw just in front of the UN Habitat, UN UNGA, UN Biodiversity Summit just last month, that WWF came out with a leaders pledge that was embraced by so many. Do you want to tell us about the future that you see in this decade, in this very, very important year and this decade of action for SDGs that cities should be doing, that regions should be doing, and that national governments should be pledging for?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm sorry about my connection. This year and also next year, WWF and partners have a big push about envisioning a new deal for nature and people. This is really about asking national governments for stronger and more ambitious commitment, but it's also recognizing the key stakeholder roles, whether it's businesses, whether it's youth, whether it's the faith community, and certainly cities. So we were very excited, especially, again, working with ICLEI to make sure that the city's voice was very present in this leaders declaration. It was not just about the national leaders are committing to nature, but it's that local leaders are committing to nature, because that is where we live. We are living in these urban spaces, increasingly so, and we need to find that connection. It has to be about the mayor, but it also has to be about the individual urban citizen. So do check more on the New Deal for Nature and People if you want to learn more, and I'm happy to share more.
Thank you, Jennifer, and please add the links in the chat box. We can also do so. Ingrid, I'm going to come to you in a second, but just, Robbie, very briefly, I want to ask you, COP15, are you optimistic that we're going to see a very ambitious and strong global biodiversity framework that will actually mean business unusual and that will actually turn us around and put us on a path that we can live in harmony with nature?
Yes, Kobe, I'm more positive than to the former COPs of biodiversity, because also the EU and the new Commission under von der Leyen and Timmermans, they are much more engaged in this direction, and also the Parliament, European Parliament, decided yesterday that the goal of 55% reduction that von der Leyen decided is not enough. Also, the Parliament said we must go to 60% reduction to 2030. And I feel the same engagement in the biodiversity question. And with Timmermans, we have a very strong commissioner there to advocate for this. And you might follow that we as Committee of the Regions are very ambitious too in this direction. And I think that the only challenge on the European level is that we are more than 95,000 municipalities throughout Europe. That's not only the large cities, metropolitan areas like Paris, London, Madrid, and Rome, and so on, but we have to have in this journey to biodiversity conservation and halt the loss. We must manage that we have all the more than 90,000 municipalities behind us, because biodiversity loss is also taking place in small areas, small municipalities. And I have I'm not euphoristic, but I have nevertheless a more positive feeling about that than 2 years ago.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic to hear from the Committee of Regions and gives us hope, all of us. And I think that optimism is shared across the board. I come across every day. So Ingrid, the last word to you. We are over time, but I do want to ask you, can you just explain to us that this series is part of something that you do every month, and why, and with whom?
Yes, sure, Kobe. We have, as Kobe has mentioned, we've got these monthly webinars to share information amongst cities, as well as actors that are involved closely with cities. And it's to share information about the advocacy effort around how do we communicate to the rest of the world and to the UNFCCC and to the CBD, etc., why cities are important actors in terms of protecting and restoring our nature and improving the quality of life of people. We also share information around different practices, best practices, case studies, learnings, etc. We have a newsletter, 2 newsletters actually that go out every month, and we do have various websites where this information is shared on, and we have circulated those also within the chat box. And just to say, Kobe, I think that there are many, many reasons why cities should join up. We've also had various comments from individuals in the chat box around how can they as individuals join, or how can they encourage their cities to join. So we've tried to respond to as many of those questions as we could. My email address is available in the chat box. People can get a hold of us. We will endeavor as soon as possible to respond to that. Please join up to Cities with Nature. There's no reason why you shouldn't. There's more than many reasons why you should, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the panelists here today. And Cities with Nature, big tent, open doors. And it's all because of partnerships like we see in practice here today. So thank you very much for everybody who joined us from the audience. Thank you to Daring Cities, a fantastic online virtual platform. And thank you to everybody who joined, especially our panelists, and especially also those who sent us messages. There's a very active chat box with lots of links. Please, this will be recorded. It is available, and go and have a look at these links. And thank you also to those who so actively posted questions. And I saw that our fantastic team back here in Cape Town was able to answer most of those questions. So without further ado, I thank you now and end the session. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.